Good morning. It is Monday, August 5th, in the very interesting year of 2024. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Well, the entire world is waiting for the other shoe to drop in the Middle East in what appears to be an impending war between Iran and Israel. Or I should say Iran, some other countries not yet certain, and Israel and the United States. This does not look good. Iran has shown a great deal of restraint. Now, they're not the good guys in this. Don't think that's the case. There's plenty of blame to go around. But when there is a hornet's nest, the last thing you should do is stir it up. My suspicion is that Iran, well, it could attack at any time. They're getting their ducks in a row the same way Israel is getting its ducks in a row, or I should say Mr. Netanyahu came to Washington to get his ducks in a row. This is not good, and there's really not a lot to say about it. It's hard to believe that about a year ago, Israel was on the verge of establishing diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, of all places. Every time somebody in the Middle East wants to make peace, there's always somebody that steps in somewhere and sabotages it. If you really want to check into something interesting, check into the first President Gemayel of Lebanon, who was assassinated shortly after he was elected and said he was going to find a way to make peace with Israel and bring peace to the Middle East. Every time somebody steps up in that part of the world and wants to do something decent, they get struck down. Kind of makes you wonder if there isn't some strange god from the desert that just likes to live off of blood and human sacrifice. But by the time anyone hears this, there could be already a shooting war going on. Iran is definitely poised to do something. If it was going to attack like it did in April when one of its people were killed in a foreign country, having one of their guests and someone who's very close to them killed in their own country, well, Mr. Netanyahu has shown a complete disdain for doing anything decent. It's not getting much press, but an awful lot of Israelis don't like what he's doing either, just like a lot of Americans don't like what Mr. Biden's doing. But the average person on the street very seldom has a say in things, these days especially. All I can say is that when the shooting does start in that part of the world, and it's inevitable at this point, expect food prices and, of course, energy prices to shoot through the ceiling because food prices are tied to energy prices. The average food you're eating at your table came hundreds of miles away, if not thousands of miles away. Speaking of unpopular leaders, the British people are rebelling. They're having riots, but sorry to have to point out the obvious, but this is a full-blown rebellion. As we all know, Europe has been subject to invasion from the Middle East and Africa for some time now. And after more young children were stabbed to death by an immigrant, or shall we say an invader, the same sort that the ancestors of the British Isles fought to keep out, a fuse was lit and a bomb went off, and people are rioting and burning, and it doesn't look like it's going to abate anytime soon. Now, the nasty Prime Minister of the UK, who has a lot in common with Mr. Netanyahu, and that he likes to stir things up, is Mr. Keir, or he's called Sir, but I'm not into royal titles, Mr. Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, just took power about a month ago. And instead of trying to calm things down after his countrymen were sick of rape and murder at the hands of these massive numbers of invaders who have nothing in common with English or British culture and don't want to have anything in common with British or English culture, he went on TV talking about having the courts run 24 hours to throw people into prison. Well, yeah, they are riots, but you know what they also are, Mr. Starmer. What they are is rebellion to the insanity brought on to your country by people like yourself. I would urge people to watch that because two things are going to happen. One, it's going to get more violent, and two, it's probably going to spread to other parts of Europe. The Europeans have had it with having their people attacked, their children raped, their way of life. It's insane what's been going on there. Now, the Irish flag was seen flying in a lot of places, and for those of you who remember the days of the Irish Republican Army, you will probably be a little bit concerned that they're very good at smuggling in weapons and smuggling in bombs. And I think you're going to see that same sort of talent put to use, and it's not going to be good for anybody. But again, this is not a surprise. You can only push human beings so far before they push back or fight back. Now, at the same time, don't think for a second that all of these people who have come into the UK from the Middle East and Africa have not also smuggled in significant numbers of firearms. I promise you that's happened. I guarantee it. I have no inside information, but it's a certainty that's gone on because that's the way people think from that part of the world. They go into a new country, they bring in weapons. They just don't use them until they have to. Now, they were brought into the country, they were allowed in, many came in illegally, but the British government took care of them. In their way of thinking, they have every right to be there now. Unfortunately, the indigenous Britons went along with what their government wanted them to do some years ago, and that's turn in their weapons. Most of them probably did that, much to their peril. So it will be, I don't want to say interesting, it's going to be tragic as to what's probably going to unfold in that country. And the British police, who seem to be run by incompetence, as well as the British government that's run by incompetence, well, they are not ready for this. Now, this is the sort of thing that threatens the United States. Fortunately, there are enough people in this country that are fighting this, that are supporting Donald Trump for president. And also the U.S. is armed to the teeth. But at the same time, when this sort of thing gets flipped on, it's very hard to flip it off. And that's going to be a very tragic situation in the UK and other countries. I suspect the next place you're going to see explode will be France and Scandinavia, which have also been on the receiving end of foreign invasion and the ensuing crime and death and suffering that follows. I was reading about Mr. Starmer in, of all places, the Times of Israel, and it went into his religious beliefs and how much of a nice guy he is and how law and order he was, but it doesn't seem that he's adhering to those principles at this time. I'd recommend checking into the guy. He's an interesting character, and it's interesting how he came into power at this time. If he stays in power, that will remain to be seen, but he seems to be taking Britain's premier police state and making it even worse. Big Brother out of 1984 would probably cringe at what they have in store for that country. In other news, the Olympics in France is continuing. You probably have heard the story about men beating up women in women's boxing. Yes, you know about it. That's more of the same insanity, or as we say, clown world that's been going on. I have to sigh at this, folks. I don't know what to say about that. I think I was born not only in the wrong century, I think I was born in the wrong dimension when I read some of these headlines. It's very hard to report this stuff. But as I said last week, the Olympics is basically a money laundering scheme. It's a great way to pay off people in third world countries. I would have nothing to do with it. And I think it's pretty much washed up after this year. I was watching a replay of the 2004 opening ceremonies in Athens, in Greece, where the Olympics originated. It was actually beautiful how drastically things have changed in only 20 years, how drastically things have changed in 50 years or 75 years. Things do not seem to be getting better in the sanity department. In the United States, we have the presidential race 2024. Kamala Harris, arguably one of the least intelligent people ever to be vice president, is, for some reason, very popular, or at least we're being told that. Frankly, I don't buy it. Donald Trump, who was able to survive an assassination attempt, has experience at being president, and has quite a bit of backing. People in the left-wing Marxist media are saying, oh, he's not going to be elected. That may or may not happen, but anybody who believes that the powers that be are going to make this a fair election in November, I do have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. As I have said continuously, the deep state elite that is influenced by Marxism, that nasty old belief system that has caused so much misery and death to humans over the last 150 years or so, they're going to do everything legal and illegal to prevent him from entering office. I predict that if Ms. Harris is elected in November, shortly thereafter, Joe Biden will find a reason to step down, and she will immediately become president in November. And the inauguration in January will just be another excuse for a big money-making party in Washington. But that's where we're at, folks. Nothing seems to work anymore, including that spaceship, the Boeing Starliner, that has stranded 2 astronauts up at the International Space Station. What does it cost? Something like $5.6 billion in taxpayer money to develop that piece of junk? Wow. More than half a century ago, we were landing on the moon. Now we can't even make a spaceship that can get people safely up into orbit or safely back to Earth. This is the problem with the elimination of meritocracy. The only thing that should run a civilization is merit. The ability to do things in the best way possible, and the individuals who can do things in the best way possible are the only ones who should be given the authority in government, in industry, in finance, in any discipline. Diversity hiring, trying to include people because of their skin color or their sex or their sexual preference or some such nonsense, has proven to be a disaster. And it has to end. And I'm going to end this report today by paraphrasing a Roman senator a long time ago when Rome was fighting Carthage. And I'm not going to comment on the politics of the time, but he ended every speech, every address to the Senate with one line to drive home a reality that none of his fellow senators at times would want to adhere to. And I'm going to paraphrase it about the times we live in. Clown world must be destroyed. Sanity must replace insanity. Clown world must be destroyed. That's it for today. If you find these podcasts and some of my writings useful, please consider a paid subscription. Please share this podcast with others. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I can also be viewed and seen and contacted up at X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. I'm up on Telegram and a few other places if you go looking for me. I am not on Facebook and have no intention of ever going back there again. So until next time, be good, be safe, Be vigilant, and good day.